water bodies throughout the world continue to be threatened by nutrient runoff. And the visual indicator, algae blooms. The primary sources of this nutrient runoff are aging wastewater treatment infrastructure, ecologically degrading agricultural practices, and stormwater runoff.
They were coming up the Connecticut River Valley. Some came up the Hudson. There's no sense of ecology, there's no sense of habitat, there's nothing like that. Trees, were being cut and cut and cut, turning the forest into a productive, working landscape. They couldn't do it fast enough. Clearing the forest, in their minds, was a completely unadulterated good. There was nothing bad about clearing. You were making a garden, you were making the Garden of Eden.
As we begin to explore the impact that agriculture has on our water quality, we realize the story reaches far beyond simple farming practices. We are confronted with systemic questions including land use history, industrialization, food sovereignty, and human health. To unravel these complex issues, we start with our historical legacy. Over the last 3 centuries, our landscape has been dramatically altered, and by the end of the 19th century, as much as 3/4 of Vermont had been cleared for farming and lumber.
It didn't take very long for people to realize that all this cutting of trees really did have a huge environmental impact. They wouldn't have used that term, they wouldn't have thought environmental impact, because they were thinking, woohoo, this is great. Huge fortunes were made.
So we still see valleys right now, today, that have these what we call legacy sediments that were mobilized because of that land use change from forest to pasture. And now they sit in these valleys, and when we have stream bank erosion, if we develop on these same watersheds that were once cleared of their forest land, all of that sediment that's hanging out in the valleys for 100 years is now being mobilized because of this change in hydrology with the urbanization.
As profound as the historical impact on our lake has been, our water quality problems have increased exponentially with the onslaught of industrial agriculture.
The supermarket, symbol of the high standard of living in this country today.
There was a conscious decision made after World War II by the U.S. Congress at the bequest of corporate America to begin to move family farmers off the land. And it was a conscious policy choice to drive down commodity prices for milk, wheat, soybeans, those kinds of commodities.
We saw a big movement towards more industrial scale agriculture that required more and more fossil fuel use, more and more pesticides, more and more fertilizer in order to grow more and more food.
And all of these chemicals, their chief reason for using them was to boost yields and to lower costs. And they do. They work just great. The problem is that these chemicals, they don't just take the costs away, they externalize them into the environment. That's where they go. Nothing disappears. When it rains, they flow down into the stream, flow down into the river, flow down into the lake. And as we all know, that's where they are.
We know that agricultural operations, especially on an industrial scale, are a part of the water pollution problem, whether it be the manure or the waste from the milk house flowing into our rivers. Corn-based agriculture in particular has been a disaster for water quality. When you're constantly tilling the land and planting it with a seasonal crop, oftentimes on slopes, you're going to see erosion from a row crop like corn.
By the way, along with the pollution, that's the farmer's dollars going down the river. And we never acknowledge that. And so people say bad farmers, bad this, bad that. Well, they're already like looking at their books going, I now have to buy $15,000, $20,000 of fertilizer I didn't have to want to buy.
Every week I had a different salesman in the yard who had a different program, had a different idea about how I might improve what I was doing, and all it was doing was sending me down the slope more and more and more. And I think many farmers today are facing that same slope. That's why there's no farmers to speak of in Vermont anymore. It's because they've been sold a bill of goods that has been good for grain dealers and fertilizer dealers and machinery dealers, but it hasn't been good for the farmer.
Dairy farmers have felt pressure from corporate and government influences, low commodity milk prices, and degraded water quality. Despite these challenges, there is significant activity throughout the state focused on water quality solutions. Anaerobic digesters convert manure into various products. The solids can be used as a bedding alternative or composted as a value-added product. The methane is used to create electricity. Some of Vermont's larger farms are linked through the local utility in a program called Cow Power, providing electricity to Vermont customers.
I've been a dairy farmer my whole life. I've milked cows for 40 years. I'm kind of proud to say that 6 years ago we formed a group called the Farmers Watershed Alliance to deal with water quality issues. One of the things we're working on is getting cover crops, rye, in there in the fall and having it grow so it holds the soil together. And probably 5 years ago there was no acres being covered with rye, and right now there's several thousand acres being covered with rye.
Cover crops planted after annuals are harvested reduce direct runoff and help build soil. With the increased demand for biofuels, researchers are exploring opportunities to integrate oilseed crops into Vermont's existing livestock systems.
On our farm, we're growing 100% of our biodiesel, so we purchase no fuel whatsoever. These are practices that maybe they can take a few acres out and still keep their dairy, but instead of growing a commodity crop, they'll grow an oilseed crop where they'll be able to make their own fuel, and they can rotate those crops into different things. So we're looking at a lot of different opportunities.
Several research sites have been established throughout the state, where farmers are experimenting with oilseed crops, livestock forage crops, and specialty grains to encourage agricultural diversity.
If we're not stewards of the land, then we're in the wrong business. We shouldn't be there. The majority of farmers that I know of, and I know a lot of farmers, they are good stewards of the land, trying to do the best they can with what they have.
We're at a point in time where consumers are asking questions about, is this cheap food policy really worth it? Sure, I would really like to not have to spend so much of my disposable income on food, but are farm families able to support themselves? Have we degraded the water quality? Are we having more and more erosion and losing soil fertility because of the way in which agriculture has evolved? So then the question becomes, how can it evolve in a different way?
My name's Guy Schwenier. I'm the owner-operator of our farm here in Highgate Center. It's a family farm, and this is a third-generation dairy farm, starting back as far as 1945 when my grandfather purchased the farm. My dad and his father worked together for a little while. My grandfather's first goal was animal health, and then my dad became primary manager of the farm in the 60s, mainly 70s. Started pushing the soil a little more, with fertilizers and bigger equipment, and pushing the cows a little more with hotter feeds, and probably confining them more than we were. I think I've come into a nice balance of maintaining production but always keeping the cow's health as a priority. And that's where I sort of took over and took off from. And I felt that the organic world was where I would fit in the best with that type of mentality.
The basic tenet of organic agriculture is to feed the soil, not the plant. This is a very different approach than conventional agriculture, where synthetic fertilizers are typically sprayed directly onto the plant. Organic farming is based on the idea that when you have healthy soil, you will grow healthy plants.
Say you have 2 apples on the shelf, one is organic, one is conventional. There is a difference. In the organic world, our goal is to let the soil do the work, let the root system go down and pull the minerals and the nutrients from the soil and bring it up into the fruit. But in the conventional world, you're feeding that plant directly with NPK. They've figured out how to give us a nice looking fruit, but yet they haven't figured out how to fill it full of nutrients that support the immune system. For a strong, healthy immune system, you need a full package. You can't have a food with an empty stem. You need a full stem of sugar and energy and nutrients that can only be provided to you coming from the root system of that plant. So I'm keeping more grass on the farm. I'm churning less and less soil. The more you loosen soil, the more you're gonna have the risk of carrying nutrients off the farm. So I'm trying to figure out ways to replace row crops as much as I can, getting energy and value out of the green grass, green legumes, higher quality feed that I can grow on the farm on a sod ground. Grass is the highest quality feed that you can feed a cow. When you allow the cow to eat the grass direct, there's absolutely no energy loss. You have to look at this grass as a solar panel, and it's capturing energy from the sun. But once you cut it for harvesting or put it in a pile, you lose energy through respiration and fermentation. So by me allowing them to graze directly, I'm actually saving money by adding energy to their diet without bringing it in. When it was time for me to go start visiting organic farms, it always gave me a good feeling because these farmers were willing to sit down and talk to me. They weren't all hyped up, in a hurry, had 1,000 things to do. So luckily, I was paired up through NOFA with a farm mentor that was very comparable to the way you like to farm. And I was matched up with Jack Laser, which was a perfect match.
Come on, girls.
This is Butterworks Farm here in Westfield, Vermont. When we originally came here, I guess we were part of the Back to the Land movement. Our initial intention was to support ourselves with all our own food and also grow the food for our animals too. We are now a diversified dairy farm. We milk 40 to 45 Jersey cows and process all our milk into yogurt, kefir, heavy cream, a little bit of cheddar cheese, other sorts of dairy products. In the past 35 years, we've sort of come up with the idea that our farm is kind of a living organism unto itself, that everything that's here is kind of supported by what's here. Of course, there are inputs coming in from the outside, but we're pretty much a grass-based farm. I mean, my cows get a very small amount of grain every day, and we grow all that grain ourselves. We're cropping about 350 to 400 acres of land, and we can usually cover about 150 acres a year with our compost.
Through the use of an innovative packed bed, Jack generates all his own compost on site. This system eliminates the problems associated with liquid manure, one of the primary agricultural contributors to water pollution.
What you're looking at behind me here is our bedding pack, which is a rather unique way to house your animals in the wintertime. They can go out the door, which you see way in the back of the barn there, or they can hang out here on the straw. The advantage to this bedding pack is that any liquids, urine coming out of the back end of the cow, or manure for that matter, pretty much gets sucked right up by this stuff and doesn't leach out. So basically the cows are living on top of their own manure pile with tons and tons of bedding. So what happens out here at the end of the season, we make about 14 windrows of compost. We spread this stuff on the land in September, the time of the year when it's the driest, and you've done your fertilization for the next season. We've got this movement afoot right now where, you know, there are just loads and loads of people that want to farm. It's increasing ever more. But the problem is the land base is limited.
Back in 1999, we were actually living down the road from this very parcel of land, and it came to our attention through the town offices that this old dairy farm was going to be up for sale. It was going to be subdivided into 2 parcels. We made the commitment and decided to become farmers and conservationists at the same time because we were worried about the land getting developed.
We're a pasture-based farm, diversified. We produce 100% grass-fed beef and lamb, pasture-raised pork and poultry. We have a 100-member vegetable CSA that we work on with the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps. Everything that we have is sold within 50 miles of the farm. So we're really a locally based farm. People ask us to ship things, and we've made a decision not to do that at this point because we can sell everything right here at home. As a small farm, we run up against a lot of hurdles, mostly regulatory hurdles, from the perspective that most regulation is designed to deal with very large operations. What we'd like to see is, in some ways, having the government where it's reasonable, and small farms who are dedicated and have local communities that know them, be able to do their own processing without a huge amount of regulatory hurdles to get over.
You hear that? He yells, they all yell back. Come on, sheep!
I think what it comes down to is that communities have relationships with the farmers that are in that community, and they know them, they know what their practices are, and they're able to make informed decisions about whether or not to purchase from those producers.
Food sovereignty is our choice. It's the people's choice to choose and eat what they want, from who they want, when they want it, and they want to go down the road and buy some farm fresh milk from a dairy farm that they can see the cows grazing happily, and they believe that that would be a healthy product for them to consume. That's their right.
Consumer choice can either encourage small, locally owned systems or perpetuate industrial agriculture. It is important to remember that the food we purchase has a direct effect on ecological integrity.
My name's Neil Urey, and I'm one of the owners of Bonneview Sheep Dairy. Me and my wife own the farm, and we have 4 kids. We milk sheep and make cheese. My great-grandfather bought it in 1890. He grew up down the road at a neighborhood farm, and then my grandfather and my uncle, and then I bought it from my uncle. When I bought it, it was still a cow dairy. It was 80 to 90 cows here, whereas my grandfather, when he started, he probably had less than 10. So I ran a cow dairy for 5 years. I was selling to St. Albans Co-op, which is a large co-op in the state of Vermont, and my milk went a little bit everywhere, but mostly for fluid milk down in Boston. There was no connection with the farm, with the milk. It was just a commodity product. And I decided to sell the cows and go with sheep. The analogy I use is, instead of being a tooth on a gear, now I'm the entire gear, a lot smaller. I used to make 1 million pounds of milk for the system. Now I'm making about 8,000 pounds of cheese, with my name brand on it.
By transitioning to sheep farming, Neil has found a way to control his own pricing and eliminate liquid manure.
The liquid manure, I always had problems with it. It was, we were spending half our diesel spreading water around. So it was a lot of tractor time. and I was always concerned about the runoff. But now we do all packed beds and compost everything and spread it in the fall. The compost just seems much better for the land. My family's been here for generations, and 100 years ago, all the neighborhood did everything together. They hayed together, they sugared together, they did everything sort of communally. And that sort of changed when the bulk tanks came in and people were, pretty much stuck to their own farm and did everything independently. And I just feel like it's slowly shifting to back the way it used to be.
Neil is part of the community in Hardwick, Vermont. Their return to the old ways of community support only begins to describe the innovative cooperation forming throughout the region.
I think what's happening in Hardwick from a broader community scale is about how we move nutrients throughout the community, and dairy nutrients are part of that. The Central Vermont Solid Waste Management District runs a truck through the area, and it stops and collects food scraps from schools and restaurants and grocery stores and nursing homes. And those materials come here where they get blended with manures from local farms, wood chip from loggers, and we make a high quality compost that then in turn goes out to growers like high-mowing seeds and Pete's Greens, who are then growing products, whether it's seeds or produce, that are coming back into the local food system. Pete sells to Claire's. Claire's separates their food scraps. The truck picks it up and brings it back here. And so one of the things that does articulate is the capacity for us to own those nutrients.
The cooperative nutrient recycling that has taken root in Hardwick is just the beginning. Anchored around the Center for an Agricultural Economy, a movement is taking shape that creates business opportunities through the identification of useful waste streams and a fresh vision for a new economy.
In order to be successful in agriculture, you needed to get bigger. You needed to expand. You needed to be able to compete, whether you're in Hardwick, Vermont, or Des Moines, Iowa, or in Southern California, that they all were competing for the same market under the same policy. We started Vermont soy, and by growing soybeans, we create an option for dairy farmers or farmers in Vermont to grow cash crops, improve their soil, and create new markets. All of our soybeans for Vermont soy come from Vermont farmers. Vermont Natural Coatings uses the byproduct of the cheese and the whey to create an environmentally safe wood finish. Our wood finish is sold all over the country, and it's a great brand, it's safe, it's durable, and it's directly connected to the cheesemaker. Another element to the diversification and value-added component is how many farmers can we convert to make cheese, to add to that market that we have, to increase the market that we have, that a farmer can milk 50 cows and make money, then lose money at 500 cows.
My name's Mateo Keeler, and my brother and I started Jasper Hill Farm in the cellars at Jasper Hill. We created Jasper Hill Farm with the intention of demonstrating that it's still possible to make a good living on a rocky hillside farm up in northern Vermont. The cellars at Jasper Hill really grew out of this opportunity that we had in collaborating with Cabot to develop a product which we have leveraged to the benefit of lots of other smaller cheesemakers. These cheeses are all being produced on farms around the state. Dairy farmers are turning their milk into cheese, and the cheeses ship to the cellars generally when they're between 3 and 5 days old. So we're getting them in fresh, and we ripen and market the cheese under a co-branded label.
The opportunity to store and market high-value cheese through the cellars at Jasper Hill gives farmers an alternative to milk production. With higher income and reduced herd size, farmers can commit more resources to environmental stewardship.
We're really focused on this idea of an economy that's rooted in a landscape. and is an expression of a landscape. You can impose an economy on a landscape. That usually leads to destruction, pollution, depletion. How do we create an economy that is an expression of a place that we love?
The Hardwick food system is a really exciting thing. The individual people that I get to work with and individual operations as a part of the system are inspirational. I think what's really important is we can very quickly make Hardwick sound like something like other. And the fact of the matter is there are a lot of these same components all over the state of Vermont and all over this country and globally. And there are food systems movements all over the place that are, I mean, this is a prairie fire right now, and it's not stopping.
We can find inspiring examples of people and organizations deeply committed to restoring the environment and rebuilding our agricultural landscape. The foundation of this transition has been established, and there's an increasing demand for a healthy regional food system.
Here we are in this little state. We're also within half a day's drive of like 50 million people. Boston, New York, Montreal. And we are a very good agricultural state. So we need to work together as a region to serve these, the regional need that we have, in addition to just serving our own need.
It really makes sense for Vermont to be developing and redeveloping their connections to those markets so we're prepared. And so we can continue to encourage people to move here, stay here, start operations so that the market is not a limiting factor, because it shouldn't be, because there's scads of market nearby, and there's very efficient ways to move food that distance, and you can still have really high quality, really fresh food if it's traveling 3 to 5 hours, something like that.
There are literally hundreds of new farmers coming in to Vermont that are starting small-scale pasture-based programs that build soils. And it all starts from the ground up. It starts with the soil, and if you're building soil, then good things are going to come from that, whether it's vegetables or crops or animals. It's all going to be good.
We have to rely on ourselves to make it happen. We need to redirect agriculture. We need to recultivate the kind of agriculture we want, but we can't be waiting for the government or anybody else to do it with us. So that means it's going to take a little bit longer, but I think it's an important way to do it because it shows that we're going to become more independent from corporate agriculture and again rebuild it as more of a community enterprise. And I don't mean that to say that it's not an important economic engine, but we cannot rely on the kind of corporate scale industrialized commodity agriculture that has frankly gotten us into the mess that we're in now.
In many ways, we don't have a choice. We have to change the existing system because it's just not going to be ecologically sustainable. And we can't continue to lose farmland from good agricultural production. We have to be able to feed ourselves. And the question's going to be, who is it that's going to provide that food?
We need to know that farm workers are paid well. We need to know that soil is being managed well. We need to know that there's no toxins in that production. We need to know that we're not eroding soil and getting it into our lakes and rivers. And so one of the key pieces is being genuine about what we're trying to do.
There is a new consciousness, and we have the chance for the first time to actually strategically develop a food system, not just here in Hardwick or Vermont, but across the whole planet. And we're going to have to. So we better.